Okay, I'm just going to start right up again. We just talked about Befindlichkeit. Now I want to talk with you about two different fundamental kinds of Befindlichkeit, or states of mind, or so findingnesses, right? Your moods. Heidegger kind of, I think you can think of these as like on a continuum. On one hand, you've got fear, and on the other side, you've got understanding. And Dasein generally lives somewhere in the middle, although most of us, it's over here on the fear side most of the time. Understanding is for where we start getting maybe a little bit of authenticity going, right? So, section 30 at page 179 is where he talks about fear. I'm not going to talk a lot about fear. I just want to tell you that most of the time we live in fear. And let me quickly illustrate how this shows up. You're sitting in class. I have a bunch of note cards. I might pull your card out and ask you questions. So you you're sitting there in class with this sort of apprehensive feeling that maybe you're going to get called on and possibly you won't know the answer and you might be a little embarrassed, and or even so that's like anxiety. There's a kind of fear in there, right? That's your so finding this, and it's not that great and it's not that small. Maybe it's very small for some of you. It's no big deal when we're online, but it's still there's a sort of worry, right? So when we think about care, how am I there? My care is generally constructed by fear. And by fear, what we mean here is just worry, concern. There's a very small levels of fear, and then there are really great dread kinds of fear, right? And everything in between. But Dasein is the sort of thing that is always concerned or worried about the sort of thing that it is. We're always worried about how we're doing, whether we're ahead of, caught up with, or behind our peers. That's a kind of fear, right? We're worried about whether someone's going to be happy with us or unhappy with us. That's a kind of fear. I'm worried about whether I spent too much money on a new bicycle and my wife's going to be mad at me. That's a kind of fear. I'm worried about whether I'm eating too much or not eating enough, whether I'm getting enough vegetables or eating too much candy. That's fear, right? I'm worried about whether this hammer is going to work so that I can please my boss so I can keep my job. Fear, right? Fear is a fundamental Befindlichkeit. When we walk into rooms, we look for our safety and comfort. That's fear. Even when we're super comfortable and we feel like everything is under control, that's just a very deficient mode of fear. Our fear level is way down, and so we feel happy and content. And when our fear level is way up, then we're very anxious and stressed. But generally, we live a life of fear. On the other hand, there's understanding. And understanding is when Dasein is able to throw itself into its own possibilities with a kind of knowledge. It chooses it's there, and it makes things significant because it knows why they're significant. Most of us, things are important because they say they're important. We care about things because they tell us we should care about things. Because we are them, and we are the they. But in understanding, there's a shift from being the they to becoming something authentic. This does not happen often. It is a way of Dasein choosing its being there. And it can only come, in the strongest sense, understanding only comes when you master your moods. When one has become a master through knowledge and will of one's Befindlichkeit. But here, understanding, on page 184, Heidegger says, understanding is the existential being of Dasein's own potentiality for being, and it is so in such a way that this being discloses in itself what its being is capable of. Here he goes on to say, not only is the world as a world, or qua world, disclosed as possible significance, but when that which is within the world is itself freed, this entity is freed for its own possibilities. In other words, only through understanding our being in the world and our Befindlichkeit within that world, there is understanding possible. And only in understanding are we free to be what we choose to be, because we will know what we are capable of ourselves. Right? Now, Heidegger goes on to say that in understanding, what you get is projection. Now, projection is not simply I throw my subconscious beliefs onto other people and pretend that they have my problems, right? So in psychology, projection is like where you see what's wrong with you in other people, right? So I'm a selfish jerk, but I don't see that I'm a selfish jerk. I can just see that everybody else in my life is a selfish jerk. That's projection psychologically. That is not what Heidegger is talking about. Here, projection is Dasein is always seeing itself, or is always being in itself, a possibility to be, one of its possibilities. And it chooses those possibilities either because it gets chosen for you by the they, by them, or you choose it for yourself authentically. And when you choose your way of being, or when your way of being is chosen for you, it is a project. That is, you project it. It becomes something, it's a possibility that you will be. You are never done. You are always projecting into a possibility. So if you think of the two extremes of possibility and actuality, Dasein is always projecting into the world of possibility, right? It's choosing one of its possibilities. Being possible is what its way of being, and it does so existentially, not factically, or just as an entity. Okay, so there's fear on the one hand, and there's understanding on the other. Now we're going to jump all the way up to page 210. Now, Heidegger here is going to talk about, so he's talking about thrownness. We are thrown into our Befindlichkeit. We already have a mood before we realize where we are in the world and what's going on all around us. And that mood determines significance and how we use our care. That is generally driven by fear, but it has this possibility of understanding. We always understand ourselves as a possibility of what we can be. However, we are generally caught up in the arms of the they. And therefore, Heidegger calls this fallen. It's the fallenness of Dasein. Now, Dasein is fallen, and it therefore carries three characteristics with it. The first of those is idle talk. The second is curiosity, and the third is ambiguity. Now, in its fallenness, or in our average everyday life as the they, this is how we go about living. We use language to get a hold of our Befindlichkeit, or our moods. Our language is the tool that enables us to come to terms with our being there and how it is that we are there. So what tools do we use to come to terms with our Befindlichkeit? The first one is idle talk. Now, idle talk is that we rest in the general knowledge of, I don't want to say common sense, but of their understanding, their knowledge. We say, and that's good enough. They say if we stay at home for the next 2 weeks, we might flatten the curve. They say all of these things. And so when we don't know what to say, and we're afraid and we're wondering, we just need words. We need words to help us to come to terms with our Befindlichkeit. And when we get those words, it's called idle talk. We just repeat what they tell us, right? We're like little parrots. They say, they say, they say. And that idle talk, generally, we just pass the word along. We don't know what we're talking about. We don't have real knowledge ourselves. We hear things and we tell them. We haven't earned it. We haven't thought it through ourselves. We just picked it up on the news. We read it in a newspaper. Somebody told us, so then we told somebody else. And this language just gets passed around, and it gives some sort of calm feeling to our Befindlichkeit, our moods. Makes us feel better about our lives somehow. He defines idle talk on page 213. Idle talk is the possibility of understanding everything without previously making the thing one's own. You can know it without having learned it. Just say what they say. Pass it off as your own. He says on the bottom, towards the bottom of page 213, in it, out of it, and against it, all genuine understanding, interpreting, and communicating, all rediscovering and appropriating anew are performed. That is, you start with idle talk because that's all you get. Like my daughter, who's 2 years old now, that's all she's got is idle talk. She's repeating what she's heard other people say. That's all we're doing all the way through college. You just repeat what other people say. You just pass it along. But that's where you have to start. And if you're going to become an authentic person someday, if you're going to have authentic understanding, you still have to start with idle talk. It's where everything comes from. Turn to page 214. He says, ontologically, this means that when Dasein maintains itself in idle talk, it is as being in the world, cut off from its primary and primordially genuine relationships of being towards the world, towards Dasein with, towards it, and towards its very being in. Such a Dasein keeps floating unattached, yet in so doing, it is always alongside the world with others and towards itself. So idle talk allows us to be engaged in the world without actually having to put roots there. We just float along. We just keep happily being them. Now, here's a great example of idle talk. Let's say you're sitting in a doctor's office and you're waiting in the waiting room, and it's quiet and there's no TV on. And everybody in the waiting room is there and nobody knows each other. You're all strangers. And there's this awkward silence. Nobody likes that. It's uncomfortable. It's fearful. Maybe just a little bit. But that uncomfort, the word for that is fear. You don't know these people. They don't know you. You don't like this silence. So what do you do to make the silence not so bad? Well, maybe you turn to your phone now, right? You have an easy escape. You can pretend these others aren't there. There's this understanding. But before those days, you might say something stupid like, nice weather we're having. Or, how about those Cubs? I hope they win the World Series this year. Or, hey, how was the traffic today? Right? You just say something. Idle talk. Just to make the fear go away. Second way that we use language to help us deal with our Befindlichkeit is curiosity. And here curiosity simply means, for Heidegger, we are interested in everything without actually digging deep into anything. We just go from one tweet to another. Like Heidegger wrote this before there was Twitter, but he was like, nobody gets into anything. All you do is sound bites. And he lived in a day when sound bites were at least, an article in the newspaper. Twitter makes curiosity all that much easier. How many people just sit on their phone and scroll through Facebook looking for one little meme or another to entertain their moment? It's curiosity. It's free-floating. It concerns itself merely with seeing in order to entertain, and there is no depth in it. So we live the life of they by living in idle talk, just passing along what we hear from others, never digging deeply into things ourselves or finding anything of great interest for ourselves. Second, through curiosity, which is we just occupy our time with seeing, entertaining, novelty, right? Here he says on page 216, when curiosity has become free, however, it concerns itself with seeing, not in order to understand what is seen, that is to come into a being towards it, but just in order to see. It seeks novelty only in order to leap from it anew to another novelty. There is distraction, no tarrying, no sitting with something, no remaining to learn deeply and be with something. Rather, it is skipping along, being distracted, and never putting roots down. What you should see is that idle talk allows us to never have to know anything. Curiosity means we never have to stay with anything. We could just be entertained from one thing to the next, one new thing to another. And now we get ambiguity. Now, Heidegger says on page 217 that idle talk controls even the ways in which one may be curious. It says that one must have read and seen it. In being everywhere and nowhere, curiosity is delivered over to idle talk. Just think about kids in high school and middle school these days. They share these Vines and these TikToks and these memes. And everybody has to know all the other memes of everybody else's because everybody quotes them. And you got to be in on it all. But none of them have any real meaning. None of them really have any substance to them. Nobody can ever really dig into anything. You just have to keep floating from one meme to the next, from one TikTok to the next, from one Vine to the next. Whatever the newest thing is, the newest fad. That's curiosity. Entertain us. And everybody has to be entertained in the same ways. That's the they. Finally, there's ambiguity. And in ambiguity, it's like being a politician in the sense that you can say things without ever having to really say them. You can talk without being accountable for the things that you say. You can just summarize. And it's because idle talk and curiosity can hide in ambiguity that no one has to be responsible for anything. I didn't come up with this. It's just a meme they shared with me, and I'm passing it along, right? Thus, Dasein's understanding, this is on page 218, the very bottom of it. Thus, Dasein's understanding in the they is constantly going wrong in its projects as regards the genuine possibilities of being. Dasein is always ambiguously there, that is to say, in that public disclosedness of being with one another where the loudest idle talk and the most ingenuous curiosity keeps things moving, where in an everyday manner everything, and at bottom nothing, is happening. That is, idle talk, curiosity, and ambiguity together make it so that we can be them and we can just freely float without responsibility, living that life. And we don't ever have to say, who is this that I'm being? And how is it that I am this there? It hides it from us, entertains us, distracts us, and keeps us moving along in an extremely, the way Heidegger describes this, superficial kind of way, right? This leads him to talk about then fallenness and thrownness. And these three ways of being in the world, idle talk, curiosity, and ambiguity, mean that we live in a world that is fallen and we are thrown into it. And on the page of 221, he says, the very bottom of that, but if Dasein itself in idle talk and in the way things have been publicly interpreted presents to itself the possibility of losing itself in the they and falling into groundlessness, this tells us that Dasein prepares for itself a constant temptation toward falling. Being in the world is in itself tempting. And what he means by that is the they and the life they want to share with us, that they invite us, constantly pull us in. This idle talk, this curiosity, this ambiguity, it keeps things moving, it keeps us involved, and it frees us from any responsibility for the person that we choose to be. It's tempting. It pulls us in. We want it. Look on page 222. He says, idle talk and ambiguity, having seen everything, having understood everything, develop the supposition that Dasein's disclosedness, which is so available and so prevalent, can guarantee to Dasein that all the possibilities of its being will be secure, genuine, and full. Through the self-certainty and decidedness of the they, it gets spread abroad increasingly that there is no need of authentic understanding or the Befindlichkeit, the state of mind that goes along with it. The last part of that, it is tranquilizing. So it tranquilizes. Just like you would a giant rogue elephant, shoot it with a tranquilizer dart, and you make it so that it's not fearful. That's what the they does for us. And so he says, falling, being in the world, which tempts itself, is at the same time tranquilizing. Second, it is alienating. So it is tempting, it is tranquilizing, just puts us to sleep. It makes it easy. And it is alienating. And by alienating, he means you are removed from yourself, you don't know yourself, you're living the life of the they, and it's superficial, and it's tempting, and it's tranquilizing, and you are separated from yourself. It is alienating. And in this, Dasein gets entangled into the they. And it throws us into a life of turbulence, constant ups and downs, because you're just living their life. This should seem terribly sad. And it is. And you should wonder, how do I get out of this? I don't want to live their life. I don't like this curiosity, this idle talk, this ambiguity. And I see that it's tempting. I see that it's tranquilizing me. I've spent all this time of my life in their life. What do I do? Talk about that next.